This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Well, I know it'll be a day late when the show goes up, but since it's the day I'm recording, happy 4th, everyone. I guess that also presumes you're a U.S. resident. If you're international, then no, July 4th is just another day at the office for you. It's a normal day at the office for most Americans these days. I still know plenty of places that don't give their employees off for Independence Day. Used to be a bigger deal when I was a child. As are most holidays. I remember we used to do the barbecuing and the big family get-togethers, and now we all hate each other and live in polar opposite ends of the country, roughly speaking. But you could probably hear the neighbors screaming outside, and if you can drown out all that nonsense, you can join me for another installment of the Five Starr Wrestling Report. If you are new to the channel, y'all can make your appreciation shown by clicking that subscribe button, like the podcast for me, and just come back and support the channel every Monday and Friday. We are on YouTube and Rumble. A lot of classic wrestling we talk about here, which is what the Friday shows mainly comprise of. It might seem like a big deal this week in history, but no, that's typically the case. Wrestling has a propensity for not really going above and beyond during the holiday season. Figuring most people probably aren't watching television anyway, so why go all out? We got 3 classic shows to review today, most of which were fairly uneventful. But that doesn't mean they don't come without their moments. There's always stuff to talk about, especially with Crockett. And in fact, one of those moments came right at the top of the program. I'm not kidding when I say this. This show may have opened with one of the dumbest things I've ever seen. We've been reviewing Crockett television for a little under 3 years now. We've seen a lot of stuff. Not too long ago, we saw Kevin Sullivan kidnap Precious in broad daylight. Never received any ramifications for that crime. I don't think I've seen anything as stupid as what we saw in the cold open here. We begin with tape footage of Al Perez working a squash match. I could probably just stop the conversation right there. Dumbest segment in NWA history. Al Perez in a wrestling match. But no, it gets dumber. So he's having what appears to be some kind of chain match. Obviously, they're using it as a tool to promote the chain match he's about to have with Nikita on the Bash Tour. And they do a spot where Perez dumps the job guy over the top rope, and he's got the chain wrapped around his neck in hangman's position. Meanwhile, from behind, in runs Nikita Koloff. And this is where it gets good. Nikita sees Al Perez blatantly choking out this poor guy. So does Nikita go after him to stop the attempted murder? Why no? You see, Nikita's got a better plan. He stands there, and he stands there, and he stands there. Time continues to pass. Al Perez is continuing to choke the life out of this poor guy with a fucking chain, seemingly for hours. Nikita's just patiently waiting for Al to turn around. All the while, I remind you, a man is being murdered. And it finally reaches the point where Gary Hart points and says, "Look, behind you." And that is when Perez frees this poor man so he can turn around and eat a clothesline from Nikita. Meanwhile, the only thing running through my head the entire time this was happening was, Nikita, you fuckwit. Save this man. So Nikita's a dick. That's what I gathered from all this. And it also led to a deal a few seconds later where Nikita somehow managed to unlock the job guy from his handcuff, despite not having possession of any key. In fact, it is Gary Hart who has possession of the key, as he frees Perez from his end of the handcuff, and then both heels bail, and Nikita's left to stand there like a fucking idiot. Because, apparently, Nikita had to attach himself to the other end of this chain in order to get his hands on Al Perez. He could not just simply, go after him. This was beyond stupid. There was not one single thing that happened here in this segment that I would consider logical and or coherent. Everybody involved here came out looking retarded. Heels and baby faces alike. And this was, mind you, minute 1 of the program. We didn't even get to the actual studio before I was about to have a conniption. I just couldn't believe this. They booked an angle where a heel was blatantly trying to kill a man, and rather the babyface run out to try to save the guy, he patiently waited for the heel to turn around as a man was having the life choked out of him. Because in Nikita's mind, the only thing he could think was, I've got to nail this fucking clothesline. I have to pop the crowd. I repeat, what a dick. So meanwhile at the studio, some other stuff happened. Ric Flair gave another one of his "to be the man, you've got to beat the man" speeches, hyping up the Baltimore showdown with Luger next week. It was pretty much the exact same promo we've heard him cut for like the last 3 weeks. Only this time he dressed up a little bit. He told Luger that he is a great physical specimen, but Flair is not going to drop the strap in Baltimore. And that's a shoot, brother. He didn't actually say that last part. I made that up. And about 2 minutes later, they immediately blew their wad by covering the other top program on television at the moment, the Barry Windham-Dusty Rhodes feud for the U.S. Heavyweight title. We pitched to ringside where David Crockett is standing with JJ and Barry. And, it was more so an interview with Barry. He told Dusty that he's got 1 week left in his career before it goes up in flames. In Baltimore, Barry is going to take everything Dusty ever taught him, and he's going to use those tools to put Dusty away for good. To which JJ chimes in at the end by reassuring Barry, Dusty may have taught you a lot of things, but the one thing he never taught you was how to lose. And you won't. And I did not quite catch Barry's audio at the end, but I'm pretty sure he just responded with something to the extent of, "You're damn right." So now that we have officially hyped up the only 2 meaningful programs for Baltimore, the matches people actually gave a crap about, We were 5 minutes into the show, which meant we had about another 55 minutes of void filler. And when you talk about the epitome of void filler, nobody better foots that bill than 1988 Ronnie Garvin. He had every Ron Garvin match you've ever seen on studio wrestling in the last 2.5 years. I don't even remember the guy he wrestled. Wasn't anybody important. He did some stretching. He did some stomping. He did some ass grabbing and head patting. And then he won with a knockout punch. At which point we came back from break where the Horsemen were cutting a promo. This time we got Tully and Arn talking up their World Tag title match with Sting and Nikita. You know, Arn's doing the full-fledged promo package coverage, putting over all the credentials of Sting and Nikita, noting that Sting's a star that rose from out of nowhere. Nikita's been a killer from the moment he migrated from Russia. But the bottom line is, they can study all the film they want. They can look for any chink in the armor. They can concoct any game plan they want. But the Horsemen never became champions by being predictable or flashy. All they had to do was rise to the opportunities that came to them. And that'll hold true in Baltimore. I mean, I enjoyed the promo. It was typical double-A greatness. I was mostly distracted watching Tully in the background, who just kind of had that thinking face on. He just stood there with his finger on his chin, probably wondering, you know, I wonder if I get out of my contract right now, I can go to the WWF and save my career temporarily. Or, you know, maybe he was just thinking of what he wanted to eat for dinner later. Who knows what Tully's thinking? Aside from not giving a whole lot of fucks. Then we went to the ring for Sting versus Gary Phelps. And I actually wrote the job guy's name down this time. Didn't know much about the match, because it was also every Sting squash we've seen in the last how many months. Flurry of offense, Sting howl, Stinger splash, Scorpion Deathlock. Followed by a completely nonsensical promo that quickly falls off the rails. This time, the conversation was about haircuts. And I'm not making that up. Sting made fun of the Horsemen because they do not have hair on their head. Which made absolutely no sense because, yes, they clearly did. I have no clue what the fuck he was talking about. He said that he and Nikita have cool hair. And they're going to win the tag belts next week. My final statement reads as follows. What? I got nothing. And then after JR and Tony Schiavone plugged the Baltimore pay-per-view and told the fans how they can order it, we go back to the ring for Al Perez and George South. They wrestled for approximately 90 seconds, and Perez won with a spinning toe hold. I told you I had nothing to say after the first 5 minutes. I honestly don't know what else there is to say about Al Perez. He looks good physically, but he's boring. He's got the personality of a dying corpse. Nobody gives a fuck about the guy. He is so boring, he can't even make Gary Hart interesting. Think about that. Then we had Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin versus Agent Steel. And the moment I saw that graphic pop up, and out comes Precious with Jimmy, I was like, fuck. Here we go. They're going to subject us to more Patty Sullivan drama. Lo and behold, that is exactly what happened. Oh, and if it matters, Jimmy won with a brainbuster. Yeah, Agent Steel was no match for Road Warrior Jimmy this week. Shocking. But then we had the confrontation with Precious and Sullivan. And this was just all kinds of rotten and bad. Because you know what it means. It means we're going to have to see Patty acting. A segment that would have fit perfectly on those retro NXTs we're talking about from 2014. With these cable access level skits that are just god-awful fucking television. This made Neil Breen's movies look like Warner Brothers productions. They're so bad. So Sullivan comes out to start agitating Precious. He has a white piece of paper in his hand, and he's taunting Precious going, "What'll you do to get this?" And Precious, in the most bland, monotone delivery possible, goes, "What do I have to do, Kevin? Why are you doing this to me? What do you want? Nah, I think I still showed too much emotion there. We have to do a second take. What do I have to do, Kevin? Why are you doing... fuck it, forget it. It sucked. And here's what I remember, too. Jimmy eventually walks in, pulls Precious away. Where the fuck did he go? He just wrestled moments prior. Where did he disappear to? Kevin Sullivan is standing here mocking his wife for about 5 minutes. Jimmy's just off playing with himself somewhere. Like a goddamn idiot. The worst husband of all time. God, I cannot stress enough how much I loathe this storyline. It is so bad. The worst attempt at a soap opera angle I've ever seen. And like, God bless Patty. I know she was a stable piece of Jimmy's career, but it's so clear she does not have a passion for this. She's out there just going through the motions, dude. I do not remember her being this bad in Dallas. Like, when she first came aboard and she was interacting with Sunshine, she was really good. Here she is in 1988, just trying to recite a bunch of memorized material. And all of it to hype up that dumbass fucking Tower of Doom match, which is also garbage. But you'll hear more about that next week. Then we had a completely arbitrary TV title match with Mike Rotunda against Tony Suber. To which I said, why not? Why not have a completely random TV title match for no reason? This segment is so goddamn stupid. Rick Steiner's out there with a fucking jump rope. And at one point, Suber gets dumped out to the floor so Rick can wrap the jump rope around the guy's body. Sullivan's over there just stomping a mud hole in him. Teddy Long just casually walks over. He sees that Rick is beating on this guy. So in order to try and attract Teddy's attention, not taking into account that he's already seen Rick Steiner beating on Suber outside the ring, Kevin casually goes over to the other side of the apron so Teddy can go, "Oh, hold on. There is a man trying to climb the ring apron over here. Let me completely pretend like I didn't just see anything Rick was doing a couple seconds ago." But it gets better. Suber gets rolled back into the ring. He's still got this fucking jump rope cable wrapped around his body. So what does Teddy do? Does he disqualify Rotunda? Does he eject the Varsity Club from ringside to make this a fair one-on-one title bout? Knowing good and well that Rick was responsible for the interference, why no? He untangles the cable. He then walks over to Rick. I believe his quote was something to the effect of, "Hey, did you do this?" I shit you not. He then hands the jump rope to Rick again. What a dip shit. Is this what started the 30-year trend of referee incompetence in wrestling? It all started here with Theodore R. Long in 1988. I know referees have a tendency to be blind, deaf, and dumb. But come on, dude. This takes dumb to a whole different level of mental retardation. So Rick continues to just interfere and attack Suber right in front of Teddy. Still not a disqualification. Rotunda's in there just doing moves and holds. And he eventually won with a butterfly suplex in what I determined to be the most remarkably stupid match in 1988. Then we come back for a Dusty Rhodes Lex Luger promo. And, well, here's basically what happened. Dusty tried to put heat on Barry Windham by saying that he's got the U.S. heavyweight title, and it belongs to Dusty. He then tried to insinuate that Luger is the next world heavyweight champion, and these studio fans were not having any of it. I was going to say they vociferously booed Dusty for that comment, and maybe a tad harsh, but they certainly were not cheering for him. They were a very pro-Horseman audience this week. Like, you could plainly hear people chanting for Barry's name. And that left Luger to flounder for a minute while he tried to save it. Luckily for him, he had the luxury of being able to take his shirt off to pop all the girls. Dusty did not have that privilege. Kind of similar to what we heard from him the other week, though. He says that he has an hour to beat Flair from pillar to post. He plans on making every minute count. It is not an Iron Man match, people. Just want to make that abundantly clear. And he promises that there will not be a sixth time for Flair to reign as champion, because once Luger beats him for the gold, that'll be the end of Ric Flair's title reigns as we know it. This also did not get over well with the crowd. And, yeah, this segment backfired. Top two babyfaces booed out of the Atlanta studio 7 days before the big title payoffs. Not a good sign. And then we had the Fantastics versus Mike Jackson and Kurt Thompson, which was actually a pretty fun little TV match. Compared to what we've seen in the previous half hour. Good God. This was a Starrcade classic by those standards. But everyone worked hard. And the stuff early on with Jackson and Fulton was pretty great. Kept it moving. Even Kurt Thompson looked good at certain points. No, scrap that. He looked okay at certain points. Good is a bit of a stretch. I will say, though, he had a lot of constipation facials, which were quite amusing at times. But the Fantastics won with the rocket launcher. Probably should have just given these guys the entire hour to wrestle this week, because I'd have rather seen that than all the other matches we got. And then we followed that with what I believe to have been Jim Cornette's best promo of the entire year. if only for one reason. He almost got Bobby and Stan to crack. The Midnights were absolutely phenomenal at staying in character, especially Bobby. It took a lot to get him to even remotely crack a smile. But Corny almost got him a couple times. He's out there in his red, white, and blue attire. He still has the Great American Bash t-shirt pulled over his dress shirt and tie. Looks like a total tool bag. And while he's running down the Fantastics and talking about Baltimore, he then begins pulling newspaper articles from the Weekly World News, reading headlines about Adam and Eve being found in Asia, World War II plane bomber found on the moon, and of course the well-known article, Elvis Presley being spotted at a Burger King in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And of course, in the latest edition, right alongside the side piece about dinosaurs honking like Buicks. By the way, that was the line that got Bobby to cover his mouth to avoid smiling. JC spouted off a poll that was taken where it was determined that a local Montana test group found that 95% of people said they don't want to see Cornette suspended above the ring in a shark cage in a straitjacket. Meanwhile, 2% voted yes, and 3% were not available for comment. I seriously have no clue how Bobby and Stan kept a straight face through 90% of that thing. I would not have been able to. I also liked how, as the interview keeps going, and Corny gets more and more hysterical, his closing line had something to do with the fact that he used to be hyperactive as a child, but now he takes medication. And by the time he actually finished, he was so out of breath and beat red. I think he just stopped mid-sentence because he couldn't get anything else out. He hugged Bobby and said he hopes he doesn't get hurt. In all fairness, overacted? Yes. Hokey? Yes. But delivered convincingly? Oh, absolutely. If anybody on this program was going to pull off the loony bin personality, why not the crazy manager that was about to be put in a straitjacket and hung 15 feet above the ring in a cage? So then we had the Rock and Roll Express in action. Yeah, remember those guys? They made their return at the Miami Clash about a month or so back and have not been seen or mentioned since. Well, they wrestled this week. They took on Joe Cruz and Bob Riddle. It may have been actually their first match since they both abruptly left the company earlier in the year, because they looked off step a bit in this match, including the finish where they visibly fucked up their patented double drop kick. There was a spot where Ricky took Bob Riddle and he gave him one of those Brock Lesnar overhead throws, not giving a fuck where or how he landed. He actually came very close to hitting his head on the bottom rope. Another inch or two and that guy would have been deceased. But yes, they botched the double drop kick. That was where I determined there is no way these guys actually had any in-ring time since they made the return in Miami. They looked so bad in this match. I mean, Ricky may have gotten 3 inches off the mat, and that's being generous. I mean, I know for a fact that only one of his feet actually made contact with the guy's head. The rest of his body, not as much. Heck of a return for the Rock and Roll Express. And then it was every Ricky and Robert promo you've ever heard afterwards, where Robert mumbles through a bunch of words and it sounds like he's gargling with semen. And then Ricky says, "We're back, baby. Rock and roll, here to stay. Woo!" That was it. That was the entire fucking promo. They are back because they apparently worked out a temporary contract with Crockett, which I believe only lasts for another couple of months before they're gone again. This place is in shambles. Then we had Ivan and the Russian Assassin going over Larry Davis and Keith Steinborn. They legitimately found the two most pale, out-of-shape jobbers they could find and said, "Here, go fight the Russians." And they were killed. Absolutely beautiful. I wrote almost nothing else down. Paul Jones was on commentary. He continues to call Ivan and the Assassin his powers of pain, still throwing shade at the Barbarian and the Warlord. And the Assassin won with a sleeper hold. They did actually give these guys their own music this week. I'm not entirely sure what you would call it, though. Some kind of Soviet dirge. I mean, it wasn't the national anthem. It was just very generic hymn music. They should have played the actual Soviet national anthem. Now, that would have gotten them some real heat. Could you imagine? So, as we come back, the Legion of Doom are at the booth cutting a promo on... No, just about everybody, in fact. Animal outright said here, "We hate a lot of people. In fact, we hate most Americans." Well, that escalated quickly. I know the Road Warriors turn heel eventually, but talk about a foreshadow. And then Hawk said that when he and Animal were growing up beating up kids on the playground, they were told that they should do this professionally because they were really good at it. I'm just trying to think of a situation how that conversation would come up with the principal. "Boys, you beat up little Timmy again and put him in an iron lung. You know, you two should really consider doing this for a living." Road Warriors. Certified ass kickers. I can see the diplomas right now. And then Precious Paul called Paul Jones sick and twisted. But the Legion of Doom are the sickest and most twisted of them all. Am I crazy, or does Animal's mohawk grow like 8 inches every week? Maybe he just stopped using conditioner. It's so frizzy. Dr. Death wrestled Ryan Wagner. He beat him in a minute with the Oklahoma Stampede. And then he proceeded to cut a promo of some description. It wasn't as bad as last week where he stumbled over himself and lost his train of thought 10 seconds in. Still had no idea what the fuck he was talking about. First, he brought up Mike Rotunda. He told him to go ask one of his former collegiate teammates what it's like to be on the field with Steve. I have no idea who any of the names were. I had to presume they were legit. Then he talked about AP and UP polls, which I believe were football references. Again, no clue what he was talking about. He put over all the baby faces and then said that Lex Luger will become the next World Heavyweight Champion. And then he talked about the Tower of Doom, noting that Kevin Sullivan and the Garvins will not come anywhere remotely close to Precious. Apparently having forgotten that the Garvins were supposed to be babyfaces. Yeah, this is booty. Long-form Dr. Death promos. We have now established that they are not any good. They can stop letting this man speak for extended periods of time. It'll be fine. The shows will not die in the ratings, people. And the show already died this week 5 minutes in when they advertised the top 2 programs for Baltimore, and then they followed it with 50-something minutes of blech. For example, the main event, the Sheep Herders versus J.C. Wild and Danny Little. If anybody was still watching the show by this point, not those immediately confined to a hospital bed, God, I'd be shocked. Awful match. I couldn't tell which guy was which, because I don't even think the announcers mentioned them by name. J.C. Wild and Danny Little. Whichever guy it was with the buggy whip arms and the blue singlet, with his fucking mayonnaise-colored knees flopping all over the place. That guy should have been taken out behind the studio after the show and put 6 feet underground. Who put him on television? He looked physically grotesque. He was so visually appalling, I almost threw up in my mouth looking at him. He had the classic 80s job guy look to the extreme. Not in a good way either. Sheep Herders won with the double gutbuster. My final note reads as follows. Why are these summer shows an hour long when they can easily be reduced down to about 45 minutes or less? By the way, that is not a rhetorical question. Again, I know the Baltimore pay-per-view is the big sell for next week. But just the idea. When they formatted this program, the 2 biggest draws for that card, they put those feuds right at the top of the program in Seg 1. And then follow that with a bunch of nothing happening, meaningless segments for an hour. I mean, I had mentally checked out of this thing by minute 10. But it's game mode. Next week we will be covering the actual Great American Bash pay-per-view. So whatever they dish out in the go-home taping, we won't have to cover it. Obviously, I'm referring to next week's studio show. I mean, they've pretty much done all they can to generate as much excitement for the top programs as they can. I don't think any amount of promo coverage is going to boost any more ticket sales. They've got their big attraction matches, and they are set. Along with the Tower of Doom. We will talk about that pay-per-view next week. And subsequently cover the ultimate demise of Lex Luger as a top babyface in WCW. So when I went into Midsouth this week, having known ahead of time that Ted DiBiase was being forced to defend the tag titles this time, no excuses, no last-minute drawbacks. Grizzly Smith was adamant that DiBiase would be on this program, in the ring, defending the belts. And the entire time I thought, what trick is DiBiase going to have up his sleeve this time? How's he going to get out of this mess? No, we already knew the hand injury was a ruse. Does he have to get hit by a bus? I'd just love to see footage of him meeting with General Akbar and the Rat Pack. They're all just conglomerating around a round table, trying to concoct all these insane ideas to get DiBiase out of having to defend the straps. Skydiving accident. Nah. Grizzly Smith would never go for that. What about Merkel cell carcinoma? No, they couldn't pull the COVID hoax here in 1983. So yeah, I'm thinking DiBiase was just about screwed. He was toast. Even Bill Watts and Boyd Pierce were salivating at the mouth waiting to see this match, knowing DiBiase was handcuffed into having to compete. They're just sitting there like, oh, this fucker's going to get it. It was beautiful. What wasn't beautiful was how they opened the show this week. Mr. Wrestling 2 versus Bob Roop. Last week, Bob Roop came back for a totally random North American title match with the Junkyard Dog, despite him seemingly not being on the show in months. And now he's back again this week to bore us all to tears. I wrote almost nothing down about the action. Although I did like the delayed sell from Wrestling 2 when Roop tried to give him a cheap shot to the ribs. They're tied up in the ropes for a sec. Roop goes to throw an elbow at 2, but 2 doesn't register anything at first. Probably because he didn't see it coming. And then he was like, oh shit, I need to sell it. Then he clutches his midsection for like half a second. The match here was so boring. Watts randomly started talking about his vacation stories. I'm not kidding you. He said that he took his kids down to some place in Mexico where they spent a few days deep sea diving, getting to see all the ocean wildlife, the octopi, king crab. You know a match sucks when even Watts has such little input that he would rather be talking about fish. It was great, too, because first he gets done talking about his daughters and their experience. He calls, like, maybe one spot of the match where Bob Roop did something. And, like, working over Wrestling 2 in the corner here. So anyway, back to deep sea diving. And then he just goes right back into talking about his trip again. I'm like, what the fuck is happening right now? Is Watts that disinterested in the action here that this is what he would rather be doing to pass the time? Well, got to admit, the stories were quite interesting. More interesting than what was happening in the ring. Wrestling 2 won with a running knee lift. Hideously dull. Then we had Rip Rogers versus Art Cruz, which was only slightly more interesting than the action we just saw from Bob Roop. I mean, at least Watts bothered to call some of the action here as opposed to falling asleep at the wheel talking about vacation stories. For the most part, it's basic mad wrestling. And then we get the spot where Rogers slaps Cruz across the face, which fired up Cruz as he did one of the most laughable stampedes around the ring trying to hype himself up. He looked like such a goofball. And they go for another minute before, as I wrote here, Cruz gives Rogers a monkey flip out of the corner, goes to the well again, Rogers braces the turnbuckle, Cruz loses via unintentional head trauma. He knocked himself out and got pinned. Like a total dweeb. And then following that was Hacksaw Butch Reed getting a pretty decisive win over Johnny Rich, which is one of the most baffling booking calls I think I've seen since we started these Midsouth reviews. Keep in mind, for those that are following along in the timeline here, Johnny Rich just scored 2 consecutive wins over the Rat Pack when he teamed with Hacksaw Duggan. He's actually been part of the featured main events for the last couple of weeks. Hell, if I didn't know any better, I'd have thought they were at least trying to elevate him up the card. Try to take him from prelim guy to mid-card guy at the most. Well, here, he was back to being just an ordinary run-of-the-mill undercard jobber. Now, in all fairness, he at least got a couple of hope spots on Reed. They gave him a small little comeback toward the end. I mean, nobody actually thought he stood a chance of going over Butch Reed here. I very much question the decision to use Johnny Rich in this spot. Because now you've just taken all that momentum he garnered and just had him start back at square one again. Gets the big TV win on 2 straight occasions, having the chance to team up with a main eventer and go up against the top heel group. Now we're here. He's just a guy again. Did not really understand that. I mean, yes, on the one hand, you're still driving the point home that Reed's an ass-kicking machine. He's still racking up wins every week and getting to display more of his new heel persona. I'd have just considered using somebody other than Johnny Rich to do the job this week. Could have used Bob Roop. Because fuck that guy anyway. Maybe Reed could have slapped some personality into him. In any case, continuing along in our theme of nothing happening squashes, we had King Kong Bundy versus Joe Stark. It went about 2 minutes. Bundy played around with Stark using the power game, and then he eventually won with the Avalanche Splash. Literally nothing else to say about it. And then we finally came to our featured bout for the week. The Mid-South Tag Title Showdown between JYD and Hacksaw Duggan versus Mr. Olympia and Ted DiBiase. Or was it? Well, as it turns out, it was another bait-and-switch call. Only this time, it was not directly the heel's fault. This was not Ted DiBiase playing possum. What happens is, the babyfaces come charging the ring and immediately go after Olympia and DiBiase before the bell even sounds. And while they're brawling on the floor, they do the angle where Olympia gets driven into the ring post and knocked out cold. The presumption from everybody watching at home is that Olympia is playing possum to some extent, because he's selling it like he's dead. So Skandar Akbar and Boris Zurkov come down to try to wake Olympia up. And Akbar's trying to call a timeout, saying there's no way this title match is going on. But Grizzly Smith ain't having any of the heels as horse shit. He tells Akbar that he signed up for a title match this week, and these people, by God, they are getting a title match. So he can either find himself a replacement partner for the deceased Mr. Olympia, or the Rat Pack can forfeit the belts. So off go the heels in search of a replacement. This is great too, because even Watts is explaining, well, you know, they have been using Boris Zurkov as the fill-in guy for DiBiase over the last several weeks. It would probably make sense just to use him. But you see, the rib in Mid-South is that the guy is completely useless as a hitman/talent. He can never get the job done. Because DiBiase's got better plans. He's going to go find himself the biggest and baddest replacement he can get his hands on. Fuck that Boris Zurkov guy. He's not a reliable source. I want a guy that'll actually help me win. Apparently Zurkov took no issue with this. So there's a minor delay as the heels go to the back in search of a replacement heel. The babyfaces are pacing around the ring, waiting for the Rat Pack to make their evident return. Sure enough, who should come out with DiBiase several minutes later but King Kong Bundy. Guy already worked a few minutes prior, but he said, you know what? I'm warmed up. I'll help you team up and go after these two meatheads. So the match resumes as scheduled. They immediately go right to the four-way deal while Alfred Neal is trying to gain control and separate everyone. The heels both get double shoulder blocked and knocked out to the floor. And to quote a famous Brian Alvarez line, It eventually broke down into a regular tag match, where all of a sudden they started obeying the rules and using the tag rope like good Samaritans. And then we eventually get the classic Alfred Neely ass over tea kettle bump, at which point all hell breaks loose. The babyfaces drag Skandar Akbar in the ring and start going to work on him. There's all kinds of bedlam going on. And there's a critical moment where Duggan's out on the floor facing the ring. So he's completely blindsided when Hacksaw Butch Reed runs out and drives him into the ring post. Now, this somehow only temporarily knocked out Duggan, as opposed to killing him like it apparently did to Mr. Olympia. And then we get one of the craziest things I've ever seen. Hacksaw Reed is perched on the top rope, waiting to come off and hit JYD with a shoulder block. And I have no idea how this happened. Whether he came off with too much momentum or maybe to misjudge the distance between himself and Dog on the mat. He comes flying off the top rope toward Dog, does a full body flip, narrowly avoids landing on his neck as he drives Dog to the ground. And then he just pops right back up and continues the attack. It was insane. I mean, initially it looked like he was going for one of those blockbuster DDTs, which I'm pretty sure hadn't even been invented yet here in 1983. So someone may have been watching their Midsouth tapes at one point and said, wow, that's a cool idea. I'm going to steal that move. I believe Hacksaw Butch Reed mistakenly invented the blockbuster, and he never even knew it. He was quite the innovator. So, well, there's some other shit that goes down at the end here. Neely eventually catches everyone interfering and just throws the match out. We see DiBiase driving his loaded glove into the Dog, who was essentially rendered unconscious by this point. And the lasting image we get in this segment is Duggan running back out with a 2x4 to fend off the heels, all by himself. But we do finally get the payoff to seeing Duggan come to Dog's aid. All those weeks that neither man ever came to assist the other during rack pad beatdowns. This week, Duggan finally answered the call. He saw Dog was defenseless on the mat. He said, "Not on my watch, motherfuckers." And he runs everybody off with his 2x4. Excellent segment. Fun match. Although you'd probably deem it more of an extended angle than a full-fledged title match. Just more of what we talk about, though, when it comes to those great Mid-South matches. The super hot angles with all the top stars. Great booking. A lot of stuff they're throwing at you at a given time. But it all makes sense in execution. Man, it just sucks they tried to make poor Arn Anderson and Magnum TA follow that. God bless these two. We knew who they would become in a few years as main attractions. Here in 1983, they were still preliminary guys by and large. Fucking Arn's still out there wearing that god-ugly fedora. The hell was he thinking? I mean, it's a good match. But after everything we just saw in the previous 10 minutes, there's no way anyone could care about this. I mean, even Watts pointed out that they just managed to wind the crowd down a little bit after the previous angle. But they both worked hard. Magnum went over with the atomic drop. By 1983 standards, you could probably accept that as a believable finish. The idea that Arn would lose clean to the atomic drop. Judging it by today's standards, after watching all these AA classics from Crockett, I can confirm this was not a believable finish. But again, Magnum gains more and more traction each week with the fans. I mean, he's greener than a pile of deer shit. But none of that matters when you're over, as we've come to learn over the years. And then we had George Weingroff and Tony Zane in the final standby for the week. Nothing much to really note about this one. I always like that they mention how George is legally blind. You know, it kind of makes his matches unique, because you're always curious with how he moves around the ring and gains his composure. I mean, he can basically scout shadows and odd glares in the lights, so he always knows where his opponent is. Really cool stuff. Pretty short. Basic chain wrestling for the most part until Weingroff caught Zane with a banana split pin. And then with the remaining airtime they had left, they put together a little highlight package for a recent Midsouth live event at the Tulsa State Fairgrounds, which, well, as most people know, is Watts' hometown. So he did some fun dubbed-over commentary calling some of the matches. In essence, the show was kind of a one-hit wonder. Outside the tag match, the rest of the show is pretty standard squash material, most of which were now noteworthy at all. Beyond my comments about how much I hate Bob Roop's wrestling, God, I hope he doesn't stick around much longer. But definitely seek out that Mid-South tag title match. A lot of activity happening in that 10-minute segment. But they moved stories forward. They capped off several weeks of anticipation getting to that point. Most notably, the fans finally getting to see DiBiase get in the ring to fight. It is kind of funny how he just got back in the ring without protesting. Didn't bring any paperwork. Didn't try to dispute it with management. He knew the jig was up. He got busted last week and he showed up to be humbled. Alright, so we're still on a tape delay with the Star Wars footage. I guess I jumped the gun last week when I considered that the go-home show for the July 4th special. I cannot confirm whether or not this is the actual go-home taping. Your guess is as good as mine. But I think I talked last week how there seemed to be a bit of a resurgence in promoting the top feuds for the event. They spent a good portion of last week hyping up the Kevin Von Erich versus Gina Hernandez-Chris Adams feud. I've been kind of underwhelmed with the way they handled that situation in the taping block since the Parade of Champions back in May. It just seems like they totally threw that storyline on the back burner. So last week helped to reinvigorate some intrigue in that feud. This week they sort of rounded out the remaining feuds by touching on those ahead of the Star Wars event. I still would not consider these great or even very good television programs. They are at least adequate. Sufficient, I might even say. They're far from exciting, though. But at least you know what's going on most of the time. We did not get off to a hot start this week. Kelly Kiniski and Brian Adias in the opener. My notes simply read the following. Two bland pieces of white meat having a very boring TV match that never gets out of first gear. I did like how Bill Mercer mentioned the angle from like 2 weeks ago when Killer Tim Brooks basically destroyed Adias' knee. A couple weeks later, he's totally fine. He's 100%. No tape around the knee. Not selling the after effect. Glad to know Brooks has proven to be a blood-borne killer. So approximately 70 headlocks later, the finish is Adias stacking up Kiniski in a backslide pin after a bunch of do-si-do rope spots. I promise you missed absolutely nothing in the previous 10 minutes. Imagine for a minute what a Kelly Kiniski versus Brian Diaz match looks like in your head, based on anything we've ever said about them as pro wrestlers. Yes, it was exactly that match. And then we followed that with Chris Adams versus Mike Bond, which really wasn't all that much better than the opener. The difference is Chris Adams was a much better wrestler than Kelly Kiniski and Brian Diaz. So it was moderately good by comparison. I absolutely lost it watching Mike Bond go on the offensive flurry. Like watching Adams bump himself for Bond at the beginning here. It was one of the wackiest things I've ever seen. Mike Bond's facials, I can't even say he looked angry or fired up. He just looked constipated. Like a 4-week turd finally made its way through his bowels, and he was ready for release. He looked so goofy. No joke, every single time he was on offense in this match, it looked like Mike Bond was trying to channel Hulk Hogan. He was like, how over the top and campy can I possibly be in my comeback? And this might come across as a newsflash to everybody listening. Mike Bond, he was not Hulk Hogan. I know. Take a sec to let that simmer. Write it down. Pin it. Whatever you have to do to remember. Mike Bond, not Hulk Hogan. So other than that, Adams mostly dominated the action. He ended up catching Bond with a pile driver, and then he caught him with a super kick to finish him off. It is kind of silly to think that Adams is going to be one of the featured matches on the Star Wars card. Yet it still takes him 8 minutes to beat a geek like Mike Bond, where he actually fed and sold for him at times. What are you going to do? It's world class. They've always got to give the baby faces something. So then we came back for an astoundingly horrible segment. Just want you to stop and think about this for a minute. When they formatted this program, somebody wrote down on a sheet of paper the following phrase: Mike von Erich promo. A poor decision. If that was a Ken Mantell call, shame on him. He should have been immediately fired from his job and or castrated. And it was exactly how you'd anticipate a Mike von Erich promo to go. Being that it was goddamn awful. To set the stage, we are at poolside with Mike, the Iceman, and Bill Mercer. And it's a really simple, basic question that Mercer's trying to ask. So simple that a fucking caveman could logically and coherently answer it. Mike, how's the shoulder? Pretty simple. Mike could not give a coherent response. It was like he forgot how to speak the English language. He just mumbled and fumbled and bumbled through this fucking thing. Every other word here was either or Sounded like a Dave Meltzer transcription. I mean, he's trying to explain that he's rehabbing his injury. Although I believe the exact thing he said here was, I'm rehabilitating the shoulder. Did not sound organic. At one point, it got so bad, the Iceman basically had to interject to save it. I did like how Mike pointed out that the Iceman's been helping him heal because he wanted to avoid surgery at all costs. So how is the Iceman presumably helping Mike here? By massaging his arm. Yep, that'll fix it right up. Must have had the hands of Jesus himself. Or maybe he was an actual disciple. So anyway, Mike can't finish a thought. So the Iceman steps in and says, let me explain the situation, Bill. He says that Mike's been going to the gym and getting stronger every day. His training is going well. And all they need is 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And they'll be fired up and ready to take the fight to Gary Hart, One Man Gang, and Tim Brooks. Now, can you dig that? And no, that was not a Booker T plug. Parsons actually said those words. So the takeaway from all this, the Iceman's great. He can talk his ass off. Mike von Erich, God bless him. I'm sure he was a lovely human being. He sucked. Plain and simple. But it all tied in with the featured bout for this week's episode. Originally, we were supposed to have the Iceman going one-on-one with The Undertaker. I meant Killer Tim Brooks. I had to do it. It was right there on the table. However, before things could get underway, we had a pre-match angle take place. The Iceman was being stalked by Gary Hart and the One Man Gang, both refusing to leave ringside. So while the Iceman's waiting on the floor for the numbers advantage to even out, here comes Kevin. And those two actually go right after the heels. So they get their little brawl out of the way before the decision is made to let it resume as a tag match. It was weird, though, because with the way they shot everything here, their commercial pitch is having the heels leave through the aisleway to go back to the locker room. Kevin and the Iceman are just kind of standing in the ring like, okay, what the fuck? So we come back from break. The heels are now just magically back in the ring, ready to fight the babyfaces. I'm not entirely sure what was going on there, but that was odd. I'm assuming they got called to come back down to the ring or something, but they never actually showed that part on TV. Regardless, we basically had a Tornado Rules tag match here. Now things finally cooled down for a little bit so Bronco could get both parties under control. Of course, when you're talking about Bronco, his level of enforcing rules only goes so far. Most of the time he just waves his hands in the air and goes, no, 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 stop. Come on, guys. That was my Bronco Lubitsch impression. I mean, the guy was in his fucking 60s. What did you expect him to do? Yeah, the heels spent a good while working over the Iceman. It was funny because they're isolating him in the corner for like 80% of the match. And you get these periodic moments where Kevin would just randomly hit the ring to illegally charge the heels for absolutely no reason. Well, like even during moments when they weren't even double teaming the Iceman. I was like, is Bronco even trying to be impartial at this point? There were like 5 different sequences here where you could have easily called for a blatant disqualification. Kevin was just being ridiculous here. And they do turn the heels on Kevin later on. And it's during the 4-way pandemonium toward the end when Gary Hart on the floor is yelling at his boys, going, 1 in, 1 out, or you'll get disqualified. As if any of that mattered worth a shit by this point in the match. Yeah, Gary Hart, concerned about getting DQ'd for having 2 of his men in the ring at the same time. So finally, Kevin gets the claw on the one-man gang. And while Brooks tosses the Iceman out to the floor, he goes over and grabs a chain from around the ring post so he can use it on Kevin. But as the heels go to try to clothesline Kevin with the chain, Kevin drop kicks Brooks. And then the Iceman runs in and hip checks the gang. Comically awesome bump from OMG, by the way. Then he rolled out to the floor. And, well, it is eventually determined, for reasons that I could not explain, the babyfaces were declared the winners via DQ. Because even though the heels attempted to use the chain on Kevin, but failed, the mere fact that the chain was even seen by Bronco, that was enough for the match to be thrown out. So I guess in hindsight, I should be glad that they drew attention to logic in that case. I mean, how many times have we seen stupid finishes involving gimmicks in wrestling where somebody brings a weapon into the ring, but it's never actually a DQ until they use the weapon? They can bring it into the ring in plain view of the ref. That's perfectly fine. It's only when they use the gimmick itself that is when it's grounds for a DQ. Because wrestling has and always will make sense. Just keep telling yourself that. Yeah, all in all, a very missable episode. Definitely a step back from last week where the program actually looked like it was building to a pay-per-view. This week was just that standard status quo world-class TV booking. You had a handful of unmemorable squashes and a main event that was mostly okay, but doesn't really do much to leave you excited for anything afterwards. Maybe it was just because the main story they pushed this week centered around the Mike von Erich kayfabe injury. I mean, out of all the matches on the Star Wars card, the Mike von Erich Iceman versus Gary Hart and crew is probably the least interesting of the bunch. Even less interesting than Jim Cornette and Scott Casey feuding over a green suit jacket. I'm still going to keep bitching about that because it's so goddamn stupid. But yeah, nothing to write home about on this one. And that is kind of unfortunate, but we're coming up on a seasonal time, so, you know, pro wrestling isn't really known for pulling out all the stops around this time of year. So, I don't know. Kind of a big swing and a miss for all 3 camps this week. But we'll pick things back up on Monday for the podcast. You know, we got some stuff coming up here, and a lot of it retro WWF related. But WWE's Money in the Bank is coming up this Saturday. So I'll be setting a little bit of time aside to check that out and see what happens. I don't know if I'm going to do a full pay-per-view recap on that one or pick and choose the matches that I want to discuss. I'll definitely talk about the men's Money in the Bank, but I don't know. I haven't really scouted the card. I think I told myself I was going to go into it blind. Do I want to do a sneak preview right now? Not really. Because then I'll just get all pissed off at the matches that I don't want to see. You know, Jey Uso's the poster boy. Yeet Bank. Can somebody please explain to me why that guy is still considered an upper mid-carder? Jey Uso. Somebody sees something in him. And I don't quite know what it is. Aside from a goofy catchphrase. Well, we have 5 matches announced, so that's at least reassuring. At least it lets me know the pay-per-view is not going to go 5 fucking hours. Yeah, we got 2 Money in the Bank ladder matches. We have a Damian Priest, Seth Rollins world title match. Oh, yeah, that's right. Seth came back to Raw a couple weeks ago. Sami Zayn and Braun Breaker for the Intercontinental title is kind of interesting. That's got to be like a smash over, right? I mean, you don't book a match like that unless you have Breaker winning the belt. But I can't imagine that match is going to go too long. I mean, if that's anything more than like a 60-second squash, I'd be surprised. And then we have a 6-man tag with Cody Rhodes, Randy Orton, and Kevin Owens against the Bloodline, which currently says any 3 members of Solo Sikoa, Tama Tonga, Tonga Loa, or Jacob Fatu. Okay. Could have just made it an 8-man tag in that case, I guess. Is anybody smelling a ruse? I'm thinking Randy Orton fucks over Cody in that match. Call it a hunch. Been watching this business for a long, long time. If a screw job finish was ever present, you could call that one in your sleep. We'll see. I think I might actually watch all those matches. Except the women's match. I'm not going to watch that. But, yeah. Men's Money in the Bank. We got Jey Uso, Carmelo Hayes, Andrade, Chad Gable, LA Knight, and Drew McIntyre. It's an interesting cast of characters there. I mean, out of the boat, well, I don't know, it's a tough call. Drew kind of seems like the obvious choice, but they could throw a curveball and go with Jay instead. Or LA Knight. Yeah. Don't hold your breath. They've been dropping the ball with that guy for the last 2 years. Still waiting for them to shit or get off the pot with him. I think LA Knight's kind of destined to feud with Logan Paul. It's also kind of weird for them to put the briefcase on a babyface. So, yeah, it's probably going to be McIntyre. We'll see, though. Oh, or Chad Gable. Could always go with Gable. Well, we'll see. We will see. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And, I guess I catch you on Monday for the Money in the Bank review, as well as the Retro Raw and Retro NXT reviews. Take care, all. Peace out.